The year was 1878, when the Colorado Territory stood as a merciless challenge to those who dared stake their claim upon its unforgiving soil. In these rugged mountains and sweeping valleys, where summer's blistering heat surrendered to winter's brutal cold, survival demanded more than mere will. It required a resilience few possessed. Here, strength meant endurance, and unexpected kindness could mean the difference between life and death for those abandoned by fortune's fickle hand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the extraordinary tale of Sarah Collins, a widow with 3 young children whose courage would be tested beyond human limits, and Nathaniel Hayes, a lone cowboy whose unexpected compassion would bridge the divide between 2 solitary souls. Forsaken by civilization and facing certain death as the most brutal winter in decades descended upon their isolated cabin, Sarah's journey would become a testament to human perseverance and the profound connections that form when all hope seems lost. The foothills west of Timberline, Colorado, bore little resemblance to the fertile Virginia farmland where Sarah Collins had spent her first 26 years. The dense pine forests, dramatic cliff faces, and unpredictable weather presented challenges her sheltered upbringing hadn't prepared her to face. Yet here she stood, staring out the frost-rimmed window of a crude log cabin that had once represented her husband's dream of Western prosperity. October 1878 settled upon the Colorado mountains with warning signs that even inexperienced settlers recognized. Squirrels gathered nuts with frantic energy, elk herded lower on the mountain slopes than usual. Even the jays seemed more insistent in their harsh cries, as though warning of something terrible approaching. Nature prepared for exceptional severity, something Sarah observed with growing dread as she inventoried their dwindling supplies. In the small clearing surrounding their isolated cabin, Sarah watched her eldest son, 10-year-old Benjamin, struggle to split logs that were too substantial for his thin arms. At 29, her face retained traces of the beauty that had once turned heads back in Richmond society, though grief and hardship had etched permanent lines around her eyes and mouth. Her chestnut hair, increasingly streaked with gray, was tied back in a practical knot, and her brown eyes carried the weariness of someone fighting an impossible battle. 7 months had passed since pneumonia had claimed her husband Daniel, leaving her alone with 3 children in the wilderness, miles from the nearest settlement. 7 months of dwindling supplies, of selling precious heirlooms to passing traders for basic necessities, of learning that frontier sympathy extended only to those who could contribute to communal survival. "Mama, look what I found." 6-year-old Emma held up a small bundle of kindling with the triumph of someone offering treasure. Beside her, 4-year-old Michael nodded vigorously, clutching his own meager collection. "That's wonderful, darling," Sarah replied, forcing warmth into her voice despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "Bring them inside, and we'll add them to our pile." The pile, a pathetically small collection of wood by the stone hearth, wouldn't last a week once true cold set in. Sarah's gaze drifted to the horizon where dark clouds gathered, bringing the promise of the season's first. Significant snow? The pantry held barely enough flour for 10 days of bread, some dried beans, half a sack of potatoes, and 3 precious jars of preserves she had made from late summer berries. Not enough? Not nearly enough. Inside the cabin's single room, Benjamin had abandoned his frustrating woodcutting attempt and was now attempting to repair a hole in the roof corner where the previous spring's rains had caused damage. His movements were methodical despite his youth, his face set in concentration that made him look painfully like his father. "The Wilkinsons' wagon passed by yesterday," Benjamin said as he worked. "They're heading to Denver before the mountain passes close." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. 3 families from the scattered homesteads nearby had departed in the past week alone. Those with connections elsewhere choosing to seek winter sanctuary rather than risk isolation as storms closed. The primitive trails connecting them to civilization. Did they stop? Sarah asked, knowing her son often gathered information while hunting in the nearby woods. Benjamin's hands stilled momentarily. Just long enough to say Mr. Peterson wants to speak with you. Said he'd be coming by this afternoon. A knot formed in Sarah's stomach. Jeremiah Peterson, the closest thing to authority in this scattered community of homesteaders, had been increasingly direct about her situation since Daniel's passing. His solutions inevitably involved separating the family, sending Benjamin to work at the sawmill down in Timberline, perhaps placing Emma with the childless Hendersons, and finding Sarah and little Michael positions as household help for one of the established ranching families. Practical solutions that ignored the heart of what made life worth living, her children together under one roof. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts, earlier than expected. Sarah smoothed her worn dress and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Children, continue with your tasks," she instructed quietly before opening the door. Jeremiah Peterson stood on her threshold, his substantial frame blocking the afternoon light. At 50, he carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions for the greater good, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed and his eyes sharp with assessment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Mrs. Collins," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "May I have a word?" "Of course, Mr. Peterson." Sarah stepped aside. "Please come in." Peterson entered, but remained standing near the door, his gaze sweeping the cabin's interior and lingering on the meager woodpile and the 3 children who had paused in their activities to watch this exchange. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Collins," he began, removing his hat but keeping his coat buttoned. "The families remaining in this valley met last night regarding your circumstances." Sarah straightened her spine, aware of Benjamin's protective gaze from across the room. "And what did the valley determine about my private matters this time?" she asked, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. Peterson's expression hardened. "Now, Sarah, there's no need for that tone. We are concerned neighbors looking out for the welfare of one of our own. The fact is, you cannot sustain this household through winter. Your late husband's claim is too isolated for a woman alone, and your sewing work isn't sufficient to feed 4 mouths during the coming months." He gestured vaguely toward the cabin's sparse provisions. "The Hendersons are departing for Denver tomorrow morning. They've agreed to take Benjamin with them. The sawmill is expanding, and they need strong boys who can learn the trade. Good, respectable work with reliable meals." "And separate him from his family?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Peterson continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The widow McKinney has agreed to take you and little Michael as boarders through winter, in exchange for your assistance with her laundry business. And the Thompsons would welcome Emma. You know they lost their daughter last spring and have taken a shine to your girl." Sarah felt a cold rage building in her chest, the kind of anger that came from months of barely contained fear finally finding focus. "You propose to divide my family, to send my 10-year-old son to labor among strangers, to separate my daughter from her brothers when she's already lost her father." "I propose to ensure they survive the winter," Peterson countered, his tone sharpening. "The Weather Service has predicted exceptional severity in the coming months. This valley has limited resources. Those who cannot provide for themselves must accept help on the terms available." "My husband helped build 3 cabins in this valley," Sarah replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "He assisted with barn raisings, shared his tools, worked from dawn until dusk to establish this community. And we all grieved Daniel's passing," Peterson said, softening his tone slightly. But sentiment doesn't fill stomachs, Sarah. This is the frontier. Practical solutions are what matter now. Before Sarah could respond, Benjamin stepped forward, his young face set in determined lines. "We can manage, Mr. Peterson," he insisted. "I've been helping Mr. Thompson with his horses. He pays me in potatoes and corn. And I've set traps in the Western Valley that should yield rabbits when the snow drives them down from the heights." "A child's efforts," Peterson interrupted dismissively. "Admirable, but insufficient. The community has made its recommendation. The Hendersons leave at first light. They're doing your family a considerable kindness by taking on another mouth to feed." "And if we decline this kindness?" Sarah asked, placing a protective hand on Benjamin's shoulder. Peterson's face reddened. "Then I cannot be responsible for what happens. Your supplies won't last 2 weeks of true winter. We've all got our own families to consider, Mrs. Collins. Charity has its limits, especially when reasonable alternatives are rejected." There it was, the threat wrapped in concern. Accept dismantling her family or face starvation alone. "I need time to consider," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The Hendersons depart at dawn," Peterson replied, already turning toward the door. "Pack Benjamin's things. Space in their wagon is limited, and they're doing you an immense favor." After he left, silence filled the cabin, broken only by little. Michael's confused whisper, "Mama, is Benny going away?" Sarah gathered her youngest into her arms, meeting the eyes of her 2 older children over Michael's head. The fear she saw there mirrored her own, but she also recognized something else. The stubborn Collins determination that Daniel had always claimed would see them through anything. "No one is going anywhere," she said firmly, making a decision. She prayed she wouldn't regret. "We are a family. We stay together." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, whistling through the cabin's imperfect seals and bringing the first flurries of snow. Her decision to decline Peterson's solution weighed heavily as she mentally inventoried their supplies yet again, searching for some strategy she'd overlooked. By morning, snow covered the ground in a thin white blanket, and the Hendersons' wagon rolled past their cabin without stopping. Sarah watched through frosted windows, feeling both relief and terror. Relief that her family remained intact, terror at the responsibility of keeping them all alive through what was coming. 3 days later, their situation had grown dire. The temperature plummeted, and the initial snowfall had been followed by a second, heavier storm that left 18 inches of accumulation. Their woodpile had dwindled alarmingly, and Sarah had begun breaking up a chair for fuel, promising her wide-eyed children that spring would bring materials for new furniture. On the 4th morning, she woke to find the water bucket frozen solid. The fire had died in the night, and her breath formed clouds in the frigid air of the cabin. The children huddled together under every blanket they owned, 3 heads of varying shades of brown nested together like birds seeking warmth. Sarah forced herself outside to gather the last of their firewood. The world beyond their door had transformed into something alien, beautiful in its crystalline perfection, but deadly in its intent. Snow had drifted against the north wall of the cabin, reaching nearly to the window. The path toward the valley was completely obscured, though smoke rising from a distant chimney proved life continued there without them. As Sarah struggled to carry the last armload of wood inside, a figure appeared at the edge of their clearing. For a moment, hope flared that someone from the valley had come to check on their welfare. Then she recognized the imposing silhouette of Thomas Mitchell, the general store owner who had extended credit to her after Daniel's death, credit that had run out weeks ago. "Mrs. Collins," Mitchell called, trudging through the deep snow toward her. "Didn't expect to find you still here. Thought you'd sent the boy with the Hendersons." Sarah clutched the wood tighter. "We declined the offer, Mr. Mitchell." Mitchell's weathered face registered surprise, then something closer to judgment. "That wasn't wise, ma'am. Not wise at all. He glanced at her dwindling woodpile and the thin smoke from her chimney. "I came to check if there might be anything of value left in the cabin. Peterson mentioned you'd likely accepted his arrangement. And there's the matter of your outstanding debt at my store." The boldness of his assumption that she would simply surrender, that her home and belongings would be forfeit, struck Sarah like a physical blow. "This is my property, Mr. Mitchell. I've not abandoned anything." Mitchell's expression hardened. "Property requires payment of taxes, Mrs. Collins, taxes I doubt you can afford." "I will settle my debt," Sarah interrupted, summoning dignity, "despite her desperate circumstances, but not by surrendering my home to scavengers." A dangerous look crossed Mitchell's face. "Careful with your words, Mrs. Collins. You've no protector now, and winter's just begun. Pride makes for cold comfort when the blizzards come." With that thinly veiled threat, he turned and trudged back toward the valley, leaving Sarah shaking, partly from cold, partly from fury, and partly from the terrible knowledge that he was right. She had food for perhaps another week, firewood for 2 days if she was careful, and no prospects for obtaining more of either. That night, as temperatures plunged to new depths and wind rattled her windows with increasing ferocity, Sarah faced the truth she had been avoiding. They would not survive this winter alone. The valley had made its decision about their value, and that decision amounted to abandonment. In the darkest hours before dawn, with her children sleeping fitfully nearby, Sarah made a desperate plan. They would attempt to reach Timberline, some 15 miles to the south. It was a perilous journey in good weather, potentially fatal in these conditions, but remaining meant certain death by starvation or freezing. By first light, she had packed everything they could carry. Their remaining food, Daniel's hunting knife, matches wrapped carefully in oiled cloth, extra socks and gloves, and his compass. She dressed the children in layers, wrapping scarves around their faces and making sure each had the warmest mittens available. "Mama, where are we going?" Emma asked, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and trust that nearly broke Sarah's heart. "We are going to find help," Sarah answered, projecting a confidence she didn't feel. "We'll follow the old trapper's trail to Timberline. There are people there who can help us through winter." "Is it far?" Benjamin asked, helping little Michael with his boots. Sarah hesitated, then chose honesty. "Yes, it's far. We'll need to be brave and strong, all of us together." Benjamin, always perceptive, met his mother's eyes with understanding beyond his years. "It's this or freeze here, isn't it?" Sarah nodded, unable to shield her eldest from the harsh reality. "Yes, but we are Collinses. Your father always said, 'The Collinses find a way,' and that's exactly what we're going to do." As they stepped out into the bitter morning, Sarah felt a strange sense of finality wash over her. They might never see this cabin again, the home where Daniel had laughed and loved, where he had taught Benjamin to whittle by the firelight, where baby Michael had taken his first steps, where they had celebrated birthdays with simple gifts, but abundant affection. Tears threatened to freeze on her cheeks as she whispered a goodbye to the life they had built and the dreams now buried with Daniel. Then, gathering her strength and her children, Sarah Collins turned southward and began the journey that would either save her family or claim them all. The journey began, promisingly enough. Though the snow was deep, the morning sky was clear, and Sarah used Daniel's compass to orient them southward toward Timberline. She placed Benjamin in charge of helping Emma through the deepest drifts, while she carried 4-year-old Michael and broke trail through snow that sometimes reached her knees. For the first few hours, determination drove them forward. Sarah pictured Timberline with its cluster of solid buildings, the sawmill where work might be found, the church where charity might be offered. She imagined securing a small room where her children could sleep safely while they rebuilt their lives. Anywhere would be better than slowly freezing in an abandoned cabin. "Tell us a story, Mama," Emma requested as they paused for a brief rest. her small face pinched with cold, despite the scarf wrapped around it. Sarah rummaged in her pack and distributed small pieces of cornbread, their meager midday meal. "What kind of story would you like?" "The one about when you and Papa first came west," Benjamin suggested. "About the stagecoach and the mountain pass." Sarah smiled sadly, grateful for the distraction. As they continued walking, she recounted the journey that had brought them to Colorado Territory 2 years earlier, when Daniel had been full of dreams about building a new life, where land was affordable enough for a man of modest means to establish a legacy for his children. By early afternoon, clouds began gathering on the western horizon, dark and ominous. The wind picked up, carrying the first biting flakes of a new storm. Sarah quickened their pace, though fatigue had already begun to set in. Her arms ached from carrying Michael, who had tried walking but couldn't manage the deep snow for long. "How much farther, Mama?" Emma asked, her breath forming clouds in the increasingly bitter air. "Several miles yet," Sarah answered honestly. "We need to keep moving." Benjamin, ever practical, suggested they take turns carrying Michael. "We'll go faster if we share the weight." By mid-afternoon, the storm had engulfed them completely. Visibility reduced to mere feet in front of them, and the howling wind disoriented their sense of direction. Even with the compass, maintaining a straight course became nearly impossible as they were forced to detour around deep drifts and unseen obstacles beneath the snow. "Keep moving," Sarah urged, Daniel's voice seeming to echo in her mind. "To stop is to die." But as the short winter day began to fade, Sarah realized with growing horror that they were lost. The landmarks she had tried to memorize from Daniel's old maps were obscured by the blizzard. Worse, her strength was failing rapidly. Each step required more effort than the last, and a dangerous warmth began to spread through her limbs despite the plummeting temperature, the first warning sign of hypothermia that Daniel had once described. The children were struggling too. Michael had fallen into an exhausted sleep in Benjamin's arms. Emma was stumbling every few steps, and even stoic Benjamin's face showed signs of dangerous fatigue. As darkness fell in earnest, they stumbled upon a small stand of pines, barely more than a dozen trees clustered together, but offering minimal shelter from the driving snow. With the last of her strength, Sarah led her children beneath the lowest branches of the largest tree, huddling against its trunk and wrapping their blankets around all 4 of them. "Just until the storm passes," she whispered, knowing even as the words left her lips that she was lying to herself. The storm showed no signs of abating, and even if it did, she had no clear idea of which direction to travel come morning. The cold penetrated their layers of clothing, and the blankets that had seemed so substantial now felt paper-thin. Sarah's thoughts turned to Daniel. Perhaps there was mercy in this end, a reunion with him beyond the veil of this life. Her eyelids grew heavy, the temptation to sleep nearly overwhelming. "Not yet," she murmured, forcing her eyes open. "Not like this." But nature cared nothing for human determination. The blizzard raged on, depositing snow around their improvised shelter, gradually encasing them in a tomb of white. Sarah's consciousness began to fade, her mind drifting into memories of warmer days, of Daniel teaching Benjamin how to fish in the mountain stream, of summer picnics in the meadow, of baby Michael taking his first steps across their cabin floor. Just as her eyes closed for what she believed would be the final time, a sound penetrated the howling wind, not the cry of wolves that she had feared might find them, but something rhythmic and deliberate. Hoofbeats approaching through the storm. Sarah forced her eyes open, straining to see through the curtain of snow. A dark silhouette materialized, a man on horseback, moving with a confidence that defied the blizzard's fury. For a moment her heart leapt with irrational hope. Daniel somehow returned to her, before reality reasserted itself. The figure paused, seemingly scanning the area, then moved with sudden purpose toward their hiding place. Sarah shrank back, against the tree trunk, instinctively gathering her children closer. The dangers of the frontier extended beyond cold and starvation. Daniel had warned her of desperate men who roamed these territories, outlaws and renegades to whom a widow and children would be merely another resource to exploit. She fumbled for Daniel's hunting knife with fingers numb from cold, positioning herself in front of her children as best she could. The branches parted, and Sarah raised the knife with a hand that trembled from both fear and cold. The figure froze, observing her defensive posture. Then a deep voice spoke, calm and measured despite the raging storm. "You're a long way from anywhere, ma'am." In the dim light filtering through the snow-laden branches, Sarah could make out the features of a man in his 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially protected by a bandana pulled up against the cold. His eyes, startlingly blue against his weather-tanned skin, showed no threat, only concern. I lost our way," Sarah managed to say, her voice rough from cold and disuse. "My children and I were trying to reach Timberline." The man regarded her silently for a moment, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. "Timberline lies many miles south," the man said finally. "This path leads only to death in the snow." "I know that now," Sarah replied, unable to keep a hint of desperation from her voice. She still held the knife, though her grip had weakened as the reality of their situation reasserted itself. This stranger, whoever he was, represented her children's only chance at survival. The man seemed to assess their condition with a single glance. "You cannot stay here. The cold has already begun to claim the little ones." Sarah knew he spoke the truth. Emma and Michael had grown dangerously still, and even Benjamin's teeth had stopped chattering, a warning sign rather than improvement. "Can you stand?" the man asked, his tone neither unkind nor particularly compassionate, merely practical. Sarah nodded, though in truth she wasn't certain. As she attempted to rise, her legs buckled beneath her, numb from hours of immobility in the cold. Without comment, the stranger caught her arm, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "My cabin lies 2 miles west," he said. "Not far, but the journey will be difficult in your condition." He studied Sarah's face. "I'm called Nathaniel Hayes. Some folks just call me Nate." "Sarah," she replied, finding strange comfort in speaking her name aloud after hours of silent desperation. "Sarah Collins, these are my children, Benjamin, Emma, and Michael." Nathaniel nodded once, surveying the children critically. "The little ones cannot walk. I'll take them on my horse. The boy can ride behind. You'll ride in front of me." With that simple declaration, Sarah found herself entrusting her children's lives to a man whose very existence she hadn't known 20 minutes earlier. A man who, despite his gentle handling of her exhausted children, carried himself with the wary readiness of someone accustomed to danger. Nathaniel Hayes secured the exhausted Collins family on his sturdy mountain horse with practiced efficiency. He placed little Michael in front of him, wrapped in his own heavy coat. Benjamin climbed up behind, holding his sister Emma between them. Sarah, despite her protests that she could walk, was lifted onto the saddle in front of the children, her weakened state leaving her little choice but to accept the help. "Hold fast," Nathaniel instructed, taking the horse's reins and beginning to lead them through the blizzard on foot. The beast seemed to understand the gravity of their situation, moving carefully through the deep snow without protest at the unusual burden. Sarah's consciousness faded in and out during the journey, the combination of hypothermia and exhaustion making reality seem distant and dreamlike. She was vaguely aware of Nathaniel's steady presence, his occasional quiet commands to the horse, and his hand sometimes reaching up to steady Michael when the child slumped too far forward. The storm continued unabated, transforming the landscape into a featureless expanse of white. Yet Nathaniel navigated with unwavering confidence, following landmarks invisible to Sarah's untrained eye. Time lost meaning as they traveled, minutes stretching into what felt like hours, the cold penetrating ever deeper despite the shared warmth of bodies huddled together on horseback. Just as Sarah feared they might be wandering in endless circles, a dark shape emerged from the swirling snow, a sturdy log cabin, larger and more substantial than the one they had abandoned. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, promising warmth within. "We've arrived," Nathaniel announced, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Hold on a moment longer." He secured the horse beneath a crude but effective lean-to shelter attached to the cabin side, then lifted the children down one by one. Benjamin remained conscious but dazed, his young face rigid with cold. Emma and Michael were limp in Nathaniel's arms as he carried them toward the cabin door. "Can you walk?" he asked Sarah, who still sat slumped in the saddle. She nodded, though in truth she wasn't certain. As she attempted to dismount, her numbed limbs betrayed her, and she slid awkwardly from the horse. Nathaniel caught her with his free arm, somehow managing to support both her and little Michael. "Lean on me," he instructed, his tone making it clear this was not a suggestion. The cabin's interior struck Sarah immediately with its blessed warmth. A fire blazed in a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the single-room structure. Rough-hewn furniture, a table, several chairs, and a bed stood in practical arrangement. Shelves lined the walls, laden with supplies, tools, and books that suggested permanence rather than temporary shelter. "Get those wet clothes off them," Nathaniel said, setting Michael down on a bearskin rug near the fire. "There are blankets in the chest. I'll tend the horse." He disappeared back into the storm, leaving Sarah momentarily stunned by both his abrupt departure and the sudden responsibility of caring for her half-frozen children. The crisis, however, demanded immediate action. With fingers slowly regaining painful sensation, she stripped the soaked outer layers from Emma and Michael, wrapped them in the thick wool blankets she found in the indicated chest, and positioned them closer to the fire's life-giving heat. Benjamin, showing remarkable resilience, had already removed his own wet coat and boots. "Mama, Emma's not waking up," he said, his voice tight with fear as he knelt beside his sister. Sarah felt a surge of terror as she turned her attention to her daughter. Emma's face remained frighteningly pale, her breathing shallow. "Rub her hands and feet gently," Sarah instructed, demonstrating the circular motion Daniel had once shown her for stimulating circulation. "Not too hard, we need to warm her gradually." By the time Nathaniel returned, they had established a rhythm, Sarah working to revive Emma, while Benjamin tended to little Michael, who had begun to stir and whimper as sensation returned painfully to his extremities. Nathaniel assessed the situation with a glance, then moved to a cupboard where he retrieved a kettle and several jars of dried herbs. "They need warmth from the inside as well," he said, hanging the kettle on a hook over the fire and adding water from a bucket. "This will help." As he worked, Sarah had her first opportunity to truly observe their rescuer. Nathaniel Hayes stood, well over 6 feet tall, with the lean, muscular build of someone whose life involved constant physical labor. His features, now visible without the obscuring bandana, were striking. A strong jaw, shadowed with several days' growth of beard, high cheekbones, and those remarkable blue eyes that seemed to notice everything while revealing little. He moved, with the efficient economy of someone accustomed to solitude, wasting no motion, as he prepared what appeared to be a medicinal tea. His clothes, though worn and patched in places, were clean and well-maintained: buckskin trousers, a faded flannel, shirt and leather vest that had seen years of use. The cabin itself revealed similar care, spotlessly clean despite its rustic construction, with everything organized for maximum utility. This was not the temporary camp of a drifter, but the established home of someone who had chosen isolation. "Your daughter's coming around," Nathaniel observed, nodding toward Emma, whose color had begun to return. Sarah looked down to find Emma's eyes fluttering open, confusion giving way to recognition as she focused on her mother's face. "Mama," she whispered, "where are we?" "Somewhere safe," Sarah assured her, relieved tears threatening to spill. "Somewhere warm." Within the hour, all three children had been revived, changed into oversized shirts Nathaniel provided as temporary clothing, while their own garments dried on a rack near the fire and settled on a pallet of blankets and furs that their host had arranged. The herbal tea he'd prepared, a bitter but warming concoction that he insisted they all drink, seemed to accelerate their recovery. Now, with her children sleeping soundly for the first time in days, Sarah sat at Nathaniel's rough wooden table, cradling a tin cup of the same tea between hands that still trembled slightly. "I owe you our lives," she said quietly, meeting his gaze directly. "I don't know how to thank you." Nathaniel shook his head dismissively. "No one survives these mountains alone. I did what anyone would have done." "No," Sarah countered. "Mr. Peterson and the others from our valley made it clear that our survival wasn't worth the resources required. They would have left us to our fate." A flicker of something, anger perhaps or disgust, crossed Nathaniel's face before his expression returned to its usual impassivity. "Some men mistake cruelty for practicality," he said after a moment. "It's a common error out here." His words resonated with Sarah's own thoughts about the valley's decision to abandon her family. Silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but contemplative, as the fire crackled and wind continued to howl around the cabin's sturdy walls. "How did you find us?" Sarah finally asked. "In that storm, it seems impossible." Nathaniel stoked the fire before answering. "I was tracking a mountain lion that's been troubling my livestock. The storm forced me to turn back, and I was following my own trail home when I caught sight of something moving beneath the pines." He glanced toward her sleeping children. "Lucky for all of us. Is this your property? We didn't know anyone had a claim this far up the mountain." A hint of a smile touched Nathaniel's lips. "It's mine insofar as I built it and live in it. I don't hold with formal claims and deeds. The mountain doesn't recognize paper ownership." This philosophy, so different from the property-focused mentality of the valley settlers, intrigued Sarah. Before she could question him further, however, exhaustion overwhelmed her. Despite her efforts to remain alert, her head began to nod, her body demanding recovery from its ordeal. "Sleep," Nathaniel advised, rising from the table. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." She meant to protest, to insist she was fine, but instead found herself being guided to the cabin's single bed. "I can't take your bed," she objected weakly. "I rarely use it," Nathaniel replied, already spreading his own blankets near the door, a respectable distance from the children's pallet. "I'm more accustomed to sleeping rough than you are." Too exhausted to argue further, Sarah surrendered to the unexpected comfort of a real mattress after months of sleeping on the hard-packed earth floor of her own cabin. "Thank you," she murmured, as consciousness slipped away. "For everything." "Jedi," she thought she heard him respond, something about debts and balance, but sleep claimed her before she could make sense of his words. Sarah woke, disoriented, momentarily panicked at the unfamiliar surroundings until memory returned, the desperate journey, the storm, Nathaniel's rescue. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, suggesting it was well past dawn. The storm had finally abated, leaving an unnatural stillness in its wake. Her children still slept soundly on their pallet, exhaustion demanding its due after their ordeal. Of Nathaniel, however, there was no sign, though the fire had been recently stoked and a pot of something that smelled like stew simmered at its edge. Sarah rose, surprised to find her body less pained than anticipated after yesterday's grueling trek. Her clothes, now dry, had been neatly folded and placed on a nearby chair. She dressed quickly, grateful for the privacy afforded by Nathaniel's absence. The cabin revealed more details in daylight. What had seemed merely functional in the previous night's firelight now showed evidence of careful craftsmanship: dovetailed joints on the furniture, intricate carvings along the mantelpiece, shelves of books that suggested a mind seeking more than mere survival. This was no crude trapper's hut, but a home built with intention and care. The door opened, admitting a blast of cold air along with Nathaniel, his arms laden with firewood. He nodded a greeting, unsurprised to find her awake. "The children?" he asked, setting the wood beside the hearth. "Still sleeping," Sarah replied. "They needed it badly." Nathaniel removed his heavy coat, revealing the same flannel shirt and leather vest from the previous night. "As did you. You've been asleep for 18 hours. 18? Sarah glanced again at the window in disbelief. "Why didn't you wake me?" "Your body knew what it needed better than your mind," he said simply, moving to check the simmering pot. "The stew's nearly ready. You should eat before the little ones wake hungry." Sarah wanted to protest being treated like a child herself, but the delicious aroma reminded her body that it had been days since she'd eaten properly. Nathaniel ladled a generous portion into a wooden bowl and placed it before her, along with a spoon carved from horn. The stew, venison with wild onions, potatoes, and herbs she couldn't identify, tasted better than anything Sarah had eaten in months. She found herself ravenous, finishing the bowl quickly and accepting a second portion without hesitation. "You're a surprisingly good cook," she observed between spoonfuls. "Necessity," Nathaniel replied, though a hint of pride showed in his expression. A man living alone either learns to prepare decent food or suffers needlessly. "Have you always lived alone?" The question escaped before Sarah could consider its propriety. Nathaniel's face closed slightly. "For 7 years now." His tone discouraged further inquiry, but Sarah's curiosity had been piqued. Before she could decide whether to press the issue, Emma stirred on the pallet, sitting up with wide-eyed confusion at her surroundings. "Mama," she called, uncertainty edging toward fear. "I'm here, darling," Sarah reassured her, moving quickly to her daughter's side. "Do you remember what happened yesterday? The storm, and Mr. Hayes finding us?" Emma's gaze moved to Nathaniel, who had retreated to the far side of the cabin, busying himself with some task that seemed designed to appear less intimidating. "The man on the horse," Emma recalled, her voice small. "He carried me through the snow." "That's right, and now we're safe in his cabin until the weather improves." This explanation seemed to satisfy Emma, whose attention shifted immediately to more pressing concerns. "I'm hungry, Mama." Soon all 3 children were awake, initially shy around Nathaniel, but quickly warming to him as he served them generous portions of stew and answered Benjamin's endless questions about the cabin, the mountain, and the impressive rifle mounted above the door. "Did you build this place yourself?" Benjamin asked, his natural curiosity overcoming any lingering caution. Nathaniel nodded. "Every log and board. Took 2 summers." "All alone?" The concept seemed impossible to the boy. "A man can accomplish more than he thinks when necessity drives him," Nathaniel replied, his eyes briefly meeting Sarah's over the children's heads. "Why do you live so far from everyone?" Emma asked with childish directness. "Don't you get lonely?" A shadow crossed Nathaniel's face. "Sometimes solitude chooses you, little one, rather than you choosing it." This cryptic answer seemed to satisfy Emma, but Sarah found herself increasingly intrigued by their rescuer's story. Clearly, Nathaniel Hayes was no ordinary mountain hermit, no uneducated trapper retreating from civilization out of misanthropy or inability to function in society. His speech, his books, the careful craftsmanship evident throughout his cabin, all suggested education and refinement at odds with his isolated existence. After breakfast, Nathaniel announced his intention to check his trap lines and hunt if possible. "The storm will have driven game down from the heights," he explained, pulling on his heavy coat. "We should take advantage while we can." "May I come?" Benjamin asked eagerly, already reaching for his boots. Sarah began to object. Benjamin was still recovering from their ordeal, and she felt uncomfortable imposing further on Nathaniel's generosity, but Nathaniel surprised her by nodding. His agreement. "Could use an extra pair of eyes," he said, "if your mother approves." Put in the position of either disappointing her son or acceding to Nathaniel's unexpected invitation, Sarah found herself nodding consent. The look of joy on Benjamin's face eased any lingering reservations. "Be careful," she cautioned, helping Benjamin into his still damp coat, "and mind Mr. Hayes's instructions." After they departed, Sarah occupied herself and the younger children with the familiar routine of domestic chores. She washed the breakfast dishes in water Nathaniel had hauled from a nearby spring, swept the already clean floor out of habit, and helped Emma and Michael practice their letters using charcoal on scraps of paper she found near Nathaniel's desk. The cabin, though simple, contained evidence of careful planning and self-sufficiency that impressed Sarah deeply. The root cellar, accessible through a trapdoor, contained enough preserved food to last months. The woodpile stacked neatly against the north wall would see 3 families through winter. Even the placement of the cabin itself, sheltered from prevailing winds by a natural rock formation with clear lines of sight in 3 directions, spoke of someone who had studied the land carefully before building. By mid-afternoon, Nathaniel and Benjamin returned, their cheeks reddened by cold, but their expressions satisfied. Benjamin carried 2 rabbits with undisguised pride, while Nathaniel shouldered a young deer. "Benjamin has a good eye," Nathaniel reported as they hung the deer from a wooden frame behind the cabin. "Spotted these rabbits where I would have missed them." Benjamin beamed at the praise. "Mr. Hayes showed me how to set snares without disturbing the snow around them," he told Sarah excitedly, "and how to read tracks to know when the rabbits last passed." What followed was an education unlike anything Sarah had witnessed before. Nathaniel demonstrated the proper way to dress game, explaining each step to Benjamin with patient thoroughness. Rather than shielding the younger children from this necessary but bloody work, he included them appropriately, teaching Emma which herbs enhance different meats and showing little Michael how to clean and prepare traps for the next day's use. "Most waste comes from ignorance," Nathaniel explained as he worked. "When you understand the true value of what the mountain provides, you learn to use everything." Indeed, nothing was discarded. Meat was separated for immediate use, smoking or drying. Hides were scraped and stretched for later tanning. Even bones and sinews were carefully preserved for tools and cordage. Sarah, who had prided herself on efficient household management in Virginia, found herself humbled by Nathaniel's comprehensive approach to survival. The skills he casually demonstrated represented generations of accumulated knowledge. Not the book learning she had valued in her previous life, but practical wisdom that meant the difference between life and death in this harsh environment. As they prepared the evening meal together, Sarah finally voiced the question that had been growing since their rescue. "Why did you really help us, Mr. Hayes? Most men living alone in these mountains avoid entanglement with others' troubles." Nathaniel continued slicing the venison without looking up. "I told you, no one survives these mountains alone." "That explains offering temporary shelter during the storm," Sarah persisted. "Not teaching my children skills you've clearly spent years perfecting, not sharing your winter stores when you have no obligation to do so." Nathaniel was silent for so long that Sarah feared she had offended him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an emotion she hadn't heard before. Something between resignation and resolve. 7 years ago, I had a wife and daughter, he said, still focused on his task. Anna and little Grace. We were traveling to Denver when a spring blizzard caught us near Silverhorn Pass. I went to seek help, leaving them in our wagon with supplies I thought sufficient. He set down his knife, finally meeting Sarah's gaze. I was wrong. The storm lasted 4 days instead of the one I anticipated. By the time I returned with help, they were gone. I'm so sorry, Sarah whispered, understanding blooming like a painful flower. And that's why you live alone up here. Nathaniel nodded once. I couldn't save them, but perhaps in saving you and your children, some balance is restored. The rawness of his confession hung between them, creating an unexpected intimacy. Sarah recognized in Nathaniel's isolated existence not the rejection of human connection that the valley residents might assume, but a penance self-imposed by a man who believed he had failed those who depended on him most. Before she could respond, Emma tugged at her skirt, breaking the moment with childish urgency about some trivial matter. By the time Sarah had addressed her daughter's concern, Nathaniel had moved outside to bring in more firewood, his confession apparently concluded. That evening, as they shared the meal prepared from the day's hunt, Sarah observed a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The children, particularly Benjamin, treated Nathaniel with increasing familiarity, peppering him with questions about mountain life that he answered with unexpected patience. Even little Michael, typically shy around strangers, had claimed a spot beside their host, fascinated by the wooden figures Nathaniel occasionally carved during quiet moments. Most striking was the change in Nathaniel himself. The reticence that had initially marked his interactions had softened, especially with the children. He smiled more readily at Emma's innocent observations, laughed at Benjamin's earnest attempts to mimic his woodsman's stance, and displayed a gentleness with Michael that spoke of a father's remembered tenderness. "Will you tell us a story, Mr. Hayes?" Emma requested as they finished the meal. "Mama always tells stories, but we've heard all of hers." "Emma," Sarah admonished, "Mr. Hayes isn't obligated to entertain us." But Nathaniel surprised her once again. "I might remember one or two," he said, settling back in his chair as the children gathered eagerly around him. The tale he told, about a clever fox outsmarting a mountain lion during the harshest winter ever recorded, contained subtle lessons about survival and resourcefulness that weren't lost on Sarah. Even more remarkable was the change in Nathaniel's demeanor as he narrated the adventure, his usual reserve giving way to animated descriptions and different voices for each animal character. When the story concluded, Sarah found herself applauding along with her children, genuinely delighted by this unexpected glimpse of the man behind the stoic rescuer. "Another one!" Michael pleaded. His earlier shyness completely vanished. "Tomorrow, perhaps," Nathaniel replied, ruffling the boy's hair with casual affection that seemed to surprise even himself. "For now, it's time young woodsmen and women rested. We have work to do come morning." As Sarah settled the children for sleep, now a comfortable routine on their pallet near the fire, she reflected on the day's revelations. Nathaniel Hayes had presented himself initially as a reluctant rescuer, a man who had done only what necessity demanded, yet his continuing generosity, his willingness to teach rather than merely shelter them, and particularly his painful confession about his family revealed depths she hadn't anticipated. Later, with the children asleep and the cabin quiet save for the crackling fire, Sarah found Nathaniel at his small desk, sketching something on a piece of paper by lamplight. "The children are quite taken with you," she said softly, taking the nearby chair he offered with a gesture. "They're good children," he replied. "Benjamin especially has the makings of a fine woodsman. His eyes miss nothing." They all respond to genuine interest, Sarah observed, something they've had little enough of since their father died. Nathaniel nodded, setting aside his sketch, a detailed map of the surrounding mountains Sarah now saw. Children recognize honesty better than most adults, he said. They know when they're truly valued and when they're merely tolerated. The observation struck Sarah deeply, articulating something she had sensed but never quite formulated about the valley community's treatment of her family. They had been tolerated, not valued, a distinction that made all the difference. In the days that followed, the Collins family and Nathaniel established a rhythm that transformed their emergency shelter into something approaching a home. The bitter cold that had nearly claimed their lives continued unabated outside, but within the cabin's sturdy walls, a different kind of warmth began to grow, one born of shared purpose and mutual respect. Each day brought new lessons in mountain survival, with Nathaniel revealing skills accumulated through years of solitary existence. Sarah, who had once prided herself on managing a proper Virginia household, found herself humbled by how ill-prepared she had been for Colorado's harsh realities. "You need to understand the mountain's patterns," Nathaniel explained as he taught Sarah to read the subtle signs in wind and cloud formations. "It speaks clearly to those willing to listen. Warning before storms, announcing game movements, revealing which plants are emerging where." They stood together on a small rise near the cabin, surveying the snow-covered landscape that stretched toward distant peaks. The blizzard had passed, leaving a crystalline world of white broken only by dark patches of pine forest and rocky outcroppings. "I never thought to learn such things," Sarah admitted. "In Virginia, weather was something to be endured, not understood, and in the valley, the men handled hunting and forecasting." Nathaniel's expression revealed subtle disapproval. "That thinking kills women and children out here. Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded by any one group when survival depends on all having it." This philosophy guided his teaching approach. Unlike the valley men who jealously guarded their hunting and tracking expertise as masculine domain, Nathaniel shared everything, showing Sarah how to set effective snares, identify animal tracks, and predict weather patterns with the same patience. He showed Benjamin. For the children, these lessons became grand adventures rather than desperate survival measures. Benjamin thrived under Nathaniel's mentorship, absorbing woodland skills with remarkable aptitude. The boy who had struggled to split logs at their own cabin now confidently wielded an appropriately sized axe, having learned proper technique rather than merely being expected to manage through brute strength. "It's not about power," Nathaniel explained when Sarah marveled at the transformation. "It's about understanding the wood's grain, using leverage correctly, and respecting the tool's design." This principle, understanding rather than forcing, extended to all his teachings. Emma discovered natural talent for identifying medicinal plants even beneath winter snow, guided by Nathaniel's careful instruction about which bark patterns indicated valuable specimens. Even little Michael contributed, his small fingers perfectly suited for the intricate work of preparing fishing lines and hooks for spring use. Most surprising to Sarah was her own adaptation. The domestic skills she had mastered in Virginia found new application in this wilderness setting, but transformed by Nathaniel's practical knowledge. Her sewing expanded from mending clothes to crafting snowshoes from sinew and hide. Her cooking incorporated unfamiliar ingredients, pine nuts, preserved berries, and game meats prepared using methods she had never encountered in Eastern kitchens. "You adapt quickly," Nathaniel observed one evening as she successfully recreated a stew he had taught her, adding her own refinements that improved the flavor. "Most Easterners resist mountain ways." "Adaptation or starvation isn't much of a choice," Sarah replied with a rueful smile. "Though I'll admit, there's satisfaction in mastering these skills that I never found in managing servants back home." Nathaniel nodded, understanding evident in his expression. Freedom often comes disguised as hardship. The mountain strips away pretense, leaves only what matters. These philosophical exchanges became increasingly common as the days passed, usually occurring during quiet evening hours after the children slept. Sarah discovered that Nathaniel, despite his isolation, possessed both formal education and a contemplative nature that sought meaning beyond mere survival. His small but carefully curated collection of books revealed eclectic interests, scientific treatises on geology and botany alongside poetry volumes and philosophical works. During a particularly fierce storm that confined them indoors for 3 days, Sarah found him reading Thoreau's Walden by lamplight, his weathered hands handling the volume with reverence. "You've read it?" he asked, noticing her interest. "In another lifetime," Sarah admitted. "My father believed in education for daughters as well as sons, though I'm not sure I understood it properly then." "Few do without experiencing true solitude," Nathaniel replied, offering her the book. "It reads differently here than in Virginia drawing rooms, I imagine." Indeed, passages that had seemed merely poetic in her youth now resonated with practical truth. Thoreau's observations about simplicity and self-reliance had transformed from abstract philosophy to lived reality in these mountains. These quiet exchanges gradually revealed Nathaniel's story in fragments, never offered as direct narrative, but emerging through occasional comments and observations. Sarah learned he had been educated at a Boston university, had worked as a surveyor for the railroad before establishing a horse ranch near Denver with his wife Anna, and had retreated to the mountains after losing his family not only to grieve, but to seek understanding that civilization couldn't provide. "The city offers distraction from pain," he explained once, when Sarah questioned his choice of such isolation. "The mountain offers transformation through it." In turn, Sarah shared her own journey, her privileged Virginia upbringing, her marriage to Daniel, despite her family's objections to his Western ambitions, their initial struggles and modest successes homesteading, and finally the devastating pneumonia that had claimed him during last winter's unexpected thaw and subsequent freeze. Daniel was a dreamer, she reflected. He saw possibility where others saw only wilderness. But dreams require practical foundations he wasn't always prepared to build. Nathaniel's response revealed unexpected insight. Most men who come west chase visions without understanding the work between imagination and manifestation. They see the mountain peak, but not the difficult climb required to reach it. This assessment of Daniel, neither harsh criticism nor false sentimentality, somehow eased Sarah's complex grief more than any conventional consolation had. Nathaniel acknowledged both the value of her husband's aspirations and the practical shortcomings that had left his family vulnerable, without judgment of either. As January deepened, bringing the coldest weather of the season, their initially awkward cohabitation evolved into complementary partnership. Morning routines developed naturally, Nathaniel rising first to stoke the fire and check nearby trap lines, Sarah preparing breakfast and organizing the day's lessons for the children, Benjamin proudly accompanying Nathaniel on increasingly longer excursions, while Emma and Michael assisted with indoor tasks suited to their abilities. The cabin, which had initially seemed crowded for 4 additional occupants, somehow expanded to accommodate their needs. Nathaniel constructed a partial loft where Benjamin could sleep, providing the growing boy some independence while creating additional floor space below. He fashioned a small desk from scrap lumber where Emma practiced her letters each morning, and built shelves sized for Michael's treasured collection of pine cones and interesting stones. These physical adaptations reflected a deeper transformation occurring within their unlikely household. Nathaniel, who had maintained such careful distance during their first days, gradually relaxed his self-imposed isolation. He began joining in evening games with the children, teaching them to play checkers with pieces carved from different colored woods. His rare laughter became more frequent, particularly when little Michael's innocent observations punctured adult seriousness. Most telling was his increasing willingness to share memories of his own family, something he had initially avoided entirely. One snowy afternoon, as he taught Emma to carve a simple wooden doll, he mentioned casually that his daughter Grace had loved similar toys. She'd name them all and create elaborate stories about their adventures, he recalled, demonstrating the proper way to hold the carving knife. Anna, my wife, would sew tiny clothes for each one from fabric scraps. Rather than retreating into melancholy after such recollections, Nathaniel seemed lighter, as though sharing these memories restored rather than depleted something essential within him. Sarah recognized the healing power of speaking loved ones' names aloud, of acknowledging their continuing presence in memory rather than locking grief away in silence. For her part, Sarah found herself rediscovering aspects of herself long suppressed by widowhood's immediate demands. Creative skills set aside during the desperate months after Daniel's death re-emerged as she fashioned new clothing for the children from available materials, incorporating techniques observed in Nathaniel's own practical garments. Her natural, organizational abilities found expression in improving the cabin's storage systems, maximizing efficiency in ways that even Nathaniel acknowledged were significant upgrades. Most importantly, she rediscovered her voice, not merely the practical instruction necessary for managing children, but the thoughtful expression of ideas and observations. Daniel, for all his virtues, had preferred being the family's primary voice, often finishing her sentences or speaking on her behalf in community gatherings. The Valley men had similarly dismissed her perspectives once she became a widow, treating her as a problem to be solved rather than a person with valid opinions. Nathaniel, by contrast, listened. He might disagree, often did, in fact, but he considered her thoughts with genuine attention before responding. Their evening discussions expanded from practical survival to philosophy, literature, and the larger questions of purpose and meaning that the mountain's harsh beauty naturally evoked. One evening, after a particularly engaging debate about whether civilization truly represented progress or merely complex distraction from essential truths, Sarah realized with a start that she felt more intellectually alive than she had in years. "I've missed this," she admitted, "conversation that stretches beyond immediate concerns." Nathaniel nodded, understanding evident in his expression. The mind needs nourishment as much as the body. Starvation comes in many forms. This observation struck Sarah deeply, articulating something she had felt but never properly identified during her months of isolation in the valley. The community there had offered physical assistance, albeit conditionally, but had provided no intellectual or spiritual sustenance. Their solution to her predicament had focused entirely on material needs, while ignoring the essential human requirement for purpose and connection. By late January, as supplies began requiring more careful rationing, despite Nathaniel's hunting success, Sarah noticed increasing concern in their host's expression during his daily weather assessments. "Something troubles you," she observed one evening after the children had fallen asleep, "beyond the usual winter worries." Nathaniel hesitated before responding, his habitual caution briefly reasserting itself. Then, apparently deciding she deserved honesty, he explained. "This winter is lasting longer than usual. Game is becoming scarce as animals deplete their fat reserves. The patterns suggest at least 6 more weeks before genuine thaw begins." The implications hung unspoken between them. 5 people required significantly more resources than Nathaniel had prepared for his solitary existence. Though he had never complained about sharing, mathematical reality couldn't be ignored indefinitely. "We're becoming a burden," Sarah stated directly, refusing to hide behind polite fiction. "You're not a burden," Nathaniel countered firmly, "but we need additional resources to sustain everyone properly until spring." Rather than suggesting their departure, which winter conditions still made impossible, he proposed a surprising alternative. "There's a trading post at Mason's Fork, about 8 miles southeast. The trail would be difficult but manageable, with snowshoes and a travois for supplies." The unexpected inclusion, "we need rather than you need," and his assumption of shared responsibility for their situation, revealed how completely their initial rescuer-victim relationship had transformed. "I have nothing to trade," Sarah pointed out, the familiar shame of poverty threatening to resurface. Nathaniel gestured toward a corner where several finished projects were stacked. Snowshoes she had helped craft, a beautifully carved wooden box Benjamin had completed under his guidance, and furs from rabbits they had collectively trapped and prepared. "Your work has value," he said simply, "as does knowledge of what supplies will truly serve a family's needs through winter. I've always traded for what a single man requires. Your perspective would ensure we return with what will benefit everyone." The proposal, framed as partnership rather than charity, preserved Sarah's dignity while acknowledging practical reality. The journey would be arduous, but offered potential solution to their resource limitations without requiring family separation. "When would we go?" she asked, decision already made. 3 days from now. The moon will be fuller, making travel safer. Benjamin is old enough to protect the younger children here while we're gone. The matter-of-fact inclusion of her son in planning, treating him as capable rather than merely a child, furthered Sarah's appreciation of Nathaniel's approach. Unlike Peterson and the Valley men who saw Benjamin only as a potential laborer, Nathaniel recognized the boy's developing maturity and responsibility. The preparations for their journey became a family project, with each member contributing according to their abilities. Benjamin helped Nathaniel construct a lightweight travois designed to be pulled through snow with minimal effort. Emma sorted through their collective possessions, identifying items suitable for trading with remarkable practicality for a 6-year-old. Even little Michael participated, helping Sarah pack dried provisions for the journey with solemn concentration. On the morning of their departure, with the children thoroughly instructed in safety procedures and Benjamin proudly accepting responsibility for his siblings, Sarah experienced unexpected emotional conflict. The prospect of leaving her children, even temporarily and in the relative safety of the cabin, triggered memories of Daniel's departure before his fatal illness, the last time she had watched him walk away. Nathaniel, with his uncanny ability to read her unspoken thoughts, paused at the cabin door. "They'll be safer here than attempting the journey," he said quietly, "and we'll return within 2 days." "I know," Sarah replied, forcing practical necessity to overcome maternal anxiety. "Benjamin knows how to maintain the fire, and there's sufficient food prepared. They'll manage well." Despite her rational acknowledgement, the moment of departure remained difficult. The children lined up at the door to bid them farewell. Benjamin serious and determined, Emma attempting to mirror her brother's maturity, but unable to suppress a quivering lip, and little Michael openly tearful despite assurances of their swift return. "Remember what we discussed," Sarah instructed, kneeling to embrace them one final time. "Benjamin is in charge. Emma and Michael must follow his instructions. No venturing outside except to the woodpile, and only in daylight." "We'll be fine, Mama," Benjamin assured her with newfound confidence. "I've been paying attention to everything Mr. Hayes taught me." Indeed, the boy had transformed remarkably during their weeks in the cabin, developing skills and responsibility that might have taken years to emerge under ordinary circumstances. Necessity had accelerated his maturation, but Nathaniel's respectful mentorship had ensured that growth occurred without crushing his youthful spirit. As they departed, following a path Nathaniel had broken through the snow during previous days' preparation, Sarah glanced back to see her children framed in the cabin doorway, a tableau of vulnerability that tightened her chest with protective instinct. Yet she also recognized the opportunity this temporary separation provided for Benjamin to exercise his developing capabilities, for all of them to practice resilience in manageable doses. The journey to Mason's Fork proved more challenging than anticipated. Though the weather remained clear, the accumulated snow created obstacles that required careful navigation. Several times they were forced to detour around drifts too deep to traverse, adding miles to their journey. Nathaniel maintained a steady pace, occasionally adjusting the travois harness to share the burden more equitably. His awareness of Sarah's physical condition, strong but still recovering from their earlier ordeal, manifested in practical adjustments rather than condescending concern. "The valley opens ahead," he informed her during a brief rest. "We'll make better time once we reach the lower elevation. The trading post should be visible by mid-afternoon if we maintain this pace." He studied her face briefly. "You're stronger than you appear. Most valley women would be complaining miles ago." The observation, delivered without flattery or exaggeration, somehow meant more than elaborate compliments might have. Nathaniel's assessments, Sarah had learned, were based on observable reality rather than social niceties. "Necessity reveals capabilities we don't recognize in ourselves," she replied, adjusting her snowshoes for the continued journey. "I'm discovering resources I never knew I possessed." Nathaniel nodded, apparently satisfied with this philosophy. The mountain teaches that lesson better than any schoolroom. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge that revealed Mason's Fork in the valley below, a small collection of sturdy buildings surrounding what appeared to be a substantial trading post. Smoke rose from several chimneys, promising warmth after their long trek. "We'll find suitable supplies there," Nathaniel assured her. "Mason deals fairly, unlike some frontier traders. He won't exploit our need." As they descended toward the settlement, Sarah felt a curious mixture of emotions: anticipation of human contact beyond their small family unit, anxiety about re-engaging with the wider world after weeks of isolation, and a strange reluctance to disrupt the intimate understanding that had developed between herself and Nathaniel during their shared responsibilities. The trading post, when they finally reached it, proved larger and better stocked than Sarah had expected. Mason himself, a barrel-chested man with remarkably tidy appearance for the frontier, greeted Nathaniel with evident respect. "Hayes! Didn't expect to see anyone from your mountain until spring thaw." His shrewd eyes assessed Sarah with undisguised curiosity, and certainly not with company. Nathaniel introduced Sarah without hesitation, his straightforward manner cutting through Mason's obvious curiosity. Sarah Collins. She and her children were abandoned by the valley settlement during last month's blizzard. I found them nearly frozen beneath the western pines. Mason's bushy eyebrows rose slightly, but he offered a respectful nod to Sarah. "Ma'am, sorry to hear about your troubles. The valley folks can be short-sighted when it comes to community responsibility." Sarah appreciated the lack of prying questions, though she suspected the full story would circulate through the small settlement by nightfall, regardless. Frontier gossip traveled faster than winter storms. The trading post's interior provided blessed warmth after their journey, along with a surprising abundance of supplies. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with essentials that ranged from practical tools to foodstuffs. Several other customers, mostly men in heavy winter gear, nodded acknowledgement as they entered, their expressions revealing the same curiosity Mason had displayed. "What brings you down from your mountain, Hayes?" Mason asked, leading them toward a pot-bellied stove at the rear of the store where coffee simmered invitingly. Must be important to risk winter travel. Provisions for 5 instead of 1, Nathaniel replied, accepting the offered coffee with evident appreciation. My supplies weren't calculated for additional mouths. If Mason found this arrangement unusual, he masked it well, focusing instead on practical matters. Supply train made it through before the last big storm. Got flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, most essentials. What are you looking to trade? Nathaniel displayed their offerings, the snowshoes, wooden crafts, and prepared furs, while explaining their needs. Mason inspected each item with professional assessment, nodding approval at the quality of workmanship. The snowshoes are particularly fine, he commented, testing the tension of the sinew Sarah had woven. I haven't seen bindings this well crafted since old Thomas Webster passed on. You've got a gift, Mrs. Collins. Mr. Hayes taught me the technique, Sarah acknowledged. Though I did adapt the binding pattern based on what I learned making lace back east. That's how new knowledge gets created, Mason observed with unexpected insight, taking skills from different worlds and combining them into something better than either alone. This philosophical perspective surprised Sarah, who had assumed frontier traders would be primarily concerned with practical exchanges rather than deeper observations. She was beginning to recognize how thoroughly her preconceptions about mountain communities had been shaped by the valley settlement's limitations. As they negotiated for supplies, Sarah noticed Nathaniel deferring to her judgment regarding household necessities, quantities of flour and beans, types of preserved fruits, even which tools would best serve their situation. This respect for her domestic expertise stood in stark contrast to her experiences with the valley men, who had dismissed her concerns as frivolous or secondary. Their trading complete and supplies secured, Mason offered use of a small boarding house. Room for the night. Trail back will be treacherous after dark, he cautioned. Widow Simmons keeps clean rooms above the dining hall, nothing fancy but warm and safe. Though eager to return to the children, Sarah recognized the wisdom in this suggestion. The winter daylight was already fading, and night travel would significantly increase their risk. Nathaniel similarly acknowledged the practical necessity, despite his evident desire to maintain their schedule. We'll depart at first light, he decided, accepting Mason's recommendation. The boarding house proved as simple but adequate as promised. A narrow room with a small fireplace, single bed, and chair that Nathaniel immediately claimed as his sleeping place, despite Sarah's protests. I've slept in far worse conditions, he insisted, arranging his coat into a makeshift pillow. Rest well. Tomorrow's journey will require full strength. This recurring pattern, Nathaniel's unwavering adherence to propriety despite their increasingly comfortable companionship, reflected his fundamental respect for boundaries. Despite their isolated cohabitation, he maintained careful distance that preserved Sarah's dignity in a society that valued traditional proprieties even in wilderness settings. The evening meal in the boarding house's small dining room provided their first interaction with the wider Mason's Fork community. Sarah found herself the subject of undisguised interest from the handful of other travelers and local residents gathered around the communal table. Widow Simmons, a formidable woman whose efficiency matched her substantial physical presence, managed introductions with brisk practicality. Folks, this here's Mrs. Collins and Mr. Hayes down from the high country, passing through, so don't pester them with too many questions. Despite this admonition, conversation inevitably turned to their unusual circumstances. A grizzled miner named Hoskins voiced what others clearly wondered. Don't often see Hayes bringing company to town, been keeping to himself these 7 years since his tragedy. Sarah tensed, uncertain how Nathaniel would respond to this direct reference to his past. To her surprise, he answered with calm honesty, rather than defensive withdrawal. Sometimes life brings unexpected changes, he said simply. Mrs. Collins and her children needed assistance when their community abandoned them. The mountain provides for those willing to learn its ways. This straightforward explanation, delivered without embellishment or apology, seemed to satisfy the gathered diners. Their interest shifted to practical matters: weather conditions in the high country, game movements, predictions for spring thaw, topics where Nathaniel's expertise commanded genuine respect regardless of his personal circumstances. Sarah observed this interaction with growing insight. These frontier people, unlike the Valley settlement, appeared to judge individuals primarily by their demonstrated capabilities rather than conventional social standards. Nathaniel's solitary lifestyle generated curiosity, but not condemnation, while her own situation, a woman temporarily residing with an unrelated man, provoked practical questions rather than moral judgment. Late that evening, as they prepared for departure the following morning, Sarah expressed this observation to Nathaniel. The people here seem different from the Valley settlement, less concerned with appearances, more focused on substance. Nathaniel nodded, arranging their newly acquired supplies for efficient carrying. Mason's Fork grew around the trading post rather than around a church or meeting house. Places develop character based on their founding principle. Trade requires pragmatism and fair assessment of value, not rigid adherence to imported conventions. This insight illuminated Sarah's understanding of community development in ways she'd never considered. The Valley settlement had been established by families seeking to recreate Eastern social structures in Western settings, while Mason's Fork had evolved organically around practical exchange. Where do we fit in such different worlds? She wondered. Aloud, not really expecting an answer, Nathaniel paused in his preparations, considering her question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Perhaps we're creating our own place, taking useful elements from different traditions while discarding what doesn't serve life in these mountains. The possibility resonated deeply with Sarah's emerging sense of identity, neither fully Eastern nor completely aligned with any existing Western community, but something new forged through necessity and deliberate choice. They departed at dawn. As planned, their travois now laden with supplies that would sustain the expanded household through winter's remaining weeks. The return journey moved more swiftly than their outbound trek, both travelers now confident in their path and motivated by reunion with the children. As they approached the final ridge before Nathaniel's cabin came into view, Sarah found herself experiencing unexpected emotional complexity. The small structure, nestled against its protective rock face, represented not merely temporary shelter from desperate circumstances, but something increasingly like home. "They've maintained the fire well," Nathaniel observed, pointing to the steady smoke rising from the chimney. "Benjamin has been attentive to his responsibilities." Pride swelled in Sarah's chest at this assessment of her son's capability. Benjamin's growth during their mountain stay had been remarkable. Not just physical skills, but the confidence and judgment that came from having his contributions truly valued. Their arrival triggered joyful reunion, with Emma and Michael rushing from the cabin despite the cold, their excitement overcoming any protocols about proper greetings. Benjamin followed more sedately, his posture reflecting newfound maturity and justified pride in having successfully protected his siblings during their parents' absence. "We managed everything just as you instructed," he reported formally to Nathaniel before allowing himself to be gathered into Sarah's embrace. "I kept the fire at proper height, checked the perimeter each morning as you showed me, and made sure Emma and Michael completed their lessons." "Well done," Nathaniel acknowledged, the simple praise clearly meaning more to Benjamin than elaborate compliments might have. A man proves himself through responsibility fulfilled, not through empty words. The unpacking and organization of their new supplies became a family celebration, with each item representing security against winter's remaining threats. Even mundane necessities like flour and sugar were greeted with appreciation that transformed basic provisions into treasures. That evening, with the children finally asleep after excitement-extended wakefulness, Sarah and Nathaniel shared quiet conversation beside the fire. Their journey to Mason's Fork had subtly altered their relationship, adding shared experience beyond the immediate household and providing external perspective on their unusual arrangement. "Benjamin mentioned something curious while you were checking the woodpile," Sarah said, her fingers busy with mending that somehow seemed less burdensome than before their journey. "He asked if we would remain here after winter ends or return to the valley." Nathaniel's expression revealed nothing as he carefully sharpened a hunting knife with practiced strokes. "What was your answer?" "That we hadn't discussed future arrangements," Sarah replied honestly. "The immediate need for survival has occupied all our attention until now." The question of their eventual separation hung unspoken between them. The practical necessity that had brought them together would eventually yield to spring's milder conditions, when travel would again become possible, and Sarah's options would expand beyond immediate survival. "The Valley Settlement has made their assessment of your family's value clear," Nathaniel observed, his tone neutral despite the judgment inherent in his words. "Would you return to those who abandoned you once you no longer require their assistance?" "No," Sarah answered without hesitation, the certainty of her response surprising even herself. "I could never trust them with my children's welfare again. But alternatives exist beyond the valley. Timberline, Denver, perhaps even Mason's Fork itself." Nathaniel nodded, his focus apparently on his sharpening task, though Sarah sensed his full attention remained on their conversation. All legitimate possibilities, each offering different advantages and challenges for a woman alone with 3 children. The description, "a woman alone," highlighted the temporary nature of their current arrangement, a reminder that practical necessity rather than permanent commitment had created their household. "We needn't decide immediately," Sarah said, filling the lengthening silence. "Spring remains distant, and many factors will influence the best course." Nathaniel finally set aside his knife, meeting her gaze directly. "The cabin would remain available to you regardless of my presence, should you wish it. The isolation has advantages for those seeking independence from others' judgment, though it demands self-sufficiency few are prepared to develop." This unexpected offer, basically gifting her his home, revealed Nathaniel's fundamental generosity beneath his reserved exterior. Yet Sarah recognized the implied separation in his phrasing, "regardless of my presence," suggesting he anticipated resuming his solitary existence once their emergency circumstances resolved. Before she could formulate response to this complex proposition, sounds from outside interrupted their conversation, the distinctive crunch of multiple footsteps in crusty snow, approaching with deliberate purpose rather than the random movements of wildlife. Nathaniel was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle with fluid efficiency that spoke of ingrained caution. "Stay with the children," he instructed quietly, moving toward the door with practiced silence. Sarah's heart raced as she positioned herself protectively near the sleeping children, memories of Thomas Mitchell's threatening demeanor during their last encounter at the Valley cabin flooding back with chilling clarity. Had the Valley men somehow tracked them to Nathaniel's remote homestead? What possible purpose could bring visitors through dangerous winter conditions to this isolated location? She heard Nathaniel open the door cautiously, then his voice carrying surprise but not alarm. "Peterson, what brings the Valley Committee this far in winter conditions?" Sarah's breath caught at the name. Jeremiah Peterson, whose practical solution had threatened to separate her family, stood outside their sanctuary. Gathering her courage, she moved toward the door, determined to face whatever confrontation had followed them to this mountain refuge. The scene outside exceeded her expectations. Not just Peterson, but 5 additional men from the valley settlement stood in the clearing before Nathaniel's cabin, their breath forming clouds in the cold night air. Lanterns illuminated expressions that seemed more desperate than threatening, their usually authoritative demeanor replaced by something approaching humility. Mrs. Collins, Peterson acknowledged her appearance with a respectful nod, very different from his previous condescension. "We've come seeking assistance rather than offering it, I'm afraid." The reversal was so unexpected that Sarah momentarily struggled to comprehend his meaning. "Assistance? From us?" Peterson removed his hat, a gesture of respect he had never shown during their valley interactions. "Influenza has struck the settlement, 15 cases already, including our only resident with medical knowledge. The Thompsons mentioned you had extensive experience nursing through similar outbreaks in Virginia." The situation's irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The very community that had deemed her family too burdensome for support now sought her specialized knowledge during their own crisis. "Nursing experience doesn't equate to medical training," she cautioned, professional responsibility overcoming any impulse toward vindictive rejection. "But yes, I assisted through 3 significant outbreaks before coming west." "Any knowledge would help," Peterson admitted, desperation evident beneath his composed exterior. "2 children died yesterday. We're trying everything, but without proper understanding of the disease's progression." He left the sentence unfinished, its conclusion too painful to articulate. Sarah glanced at Nathaniel, finding his expression carefully neutral, supporting whatever decision she might make without imposing his perspective. This respect for her autonomy, even in crisis, deepened her appreciation for the true partnership that had developed between them. "The children?" she asked, practical concerns foremost, despite the valley's prior treatment of her family. "Benjamin and Emma could remain here," Nathaniel offered immediately, understanding her primary concern. "I would ensure their safety and continued education during your absence." Peterson nodded agreement with this arrangement. "We've brought extra horses for swift travel. The situation requires immediate attention if more lives are to be saved." The decision crystallized with surprising clarity. Personal grievances against the valley's abandonment, however justified, couldn't outweigh the immediate threat to innocent lives, particularly children who bore no responsibility for community leadership decisions. "I'll need to gather specific supplies," Sarah stated, already mentally cataloging the herbal remedies she had learned to recognize during their mountain stay. "Nathaniel, do we have sufficient pine needle tea and the bark from those white willows by the eastern clearing?" Her immediate practical focus transformed the atmosphere, replacing potential confrontation with purposeful cooperation. While she gathered necessary items, Sarah provided clear instructions to Benjamin and Emma, who had awakened during the commotion. "I must help with sickness in the valley," she explained, meeting their anxious gazes with calm certainty. "You'll remain here with Mr. Hayes, safe from infection and continuing your lessons until I return." Benjamin, demonstrating his newfound maturity, nodded understanding. "We'll maintain everything properly, Mama, like when you went to Mason's Fork." "Will you come back?" Emma asked, the question revealing fears stemming from their father's permanent departure. Sarah embraced her daughter firmly. "Always. This is where we belong now." The simple declaration, spoken without premeditation, revealed Sarah's subconscious decision more clearly than any deliberate consideration could have. This mountain cabin, with its unlikely family configuration, had become home in ways the valley settlement never had. As she prepared for departure, Sarah found Nathaniel arranging additional supplies she might need, his efficiency expressing support more clearly than words might have. "I'll return when the crisis stabilizes," she promised, suddenly reluctant to leave despite the emergency's clear demands. "We'll be here," he replied simply, the response encompassing both practical fact and deeper commitment. "The children will be well protected." Peterson and his companions remained respectfully silent during these exchanges, their previous judgment of the Collins-Hayes household arrangement noticeably absent in the face of pressing necessity. Crisis had clarified priorities, stripping away social conventions to reveal core values beneath. As Sarah mounted the offered horse and prepared to ride into the night, Nathaniel stepped forward with uncharacteristic public demonstration, briefly clasping her hand. "Remember what the mountain has taught you," he said quietly. "Trust your knowledge even when others doubt. You've survived worse challenges than this." The validation, acknowledging both her refined abilities and the strength developed through their shared experiences, provided courage beyond what mere encouragement might have offered. Nathaniel wasn't expressing blind faith, but specific confidence based on demonstrated capability. The journey to the valley proved far swifter than Sarah expected, the riders moving with urgent purpose through trails that would have been impassable to her months earlier. As they approached the settlement, lights glowed from cabin windows, despite the late hour, evidence of the sleepless vigil that serious illness imposed on communities. The welcoming committee that greeted their arrival revealed how thoroughly the crisis had transformed valley dynamics. Women who had previously avoided Sarah after Daniel's death now approached eagerly, desperate for guidance. Men who had supported Peterson's family separation plan now offered respectful assistance with her supplies and equipment. Most striking was the deference now shown to her expertise, a complete reversal from previous dismissal of her perspectives. When Sarah began organizing treatment procedures, establishing separate areas for different stages of illness, and implementing strict sanitation protocols remembered from Virginia outbreaks, the community followed her instructions without question. "Boil all water before drinking," she directed, her voice carrying authority developed during mountain survival. "Wash hands in vinegar solution between tending different patients. Keep the sick room windows cracked for fresh air, regardless of temperature." These instructions, based on modern medical understanding rather than superstition, contradicted several folk practices the settlement had been following. Yet no one challenged her directions, recognizing that their previous approaches had failed to contain the outbreak. For 3 exhausting days, Sarah worked without significant rest, moving between cabins where influenza had struck hardest. She prepared herbal remedies learned from Nathaniel, adapted Virginia medical techniques to frontier limitations, and provided both practical care and emotional support to frightened families. Throughout this intense period, Sarah recognized how profoundly her mountain experience had transformed her capabilities. The woman who had once struggled to split kindling now worked tirelessly through physical demands that would have overwhelmed her months earlier. The mother who had feared making decisions without her husband now directed community-wide health protocols with confident authority. Most importantly, the survivor who had once been deemed expendable by this very community now served as its essential protector, her value no longer questioned by those who had previously judged her worth solely through conventional standards. On the 4th day, as the crisis began showing signs of containment with no new cases reported, Peterson approached Sarah as she prepared fresh poultices for the remaining patients. "We misjudged you, Mrs. Collins," he acknowledged, the admission clearly difficult for a man accustomed to unchallenged authority. "Not just your medical knowledge, but your fundamental strength. The settlement owes you a debt we can never properly repay." Sarah continued her work, neither rushing to absolve his conscience nor dwelling on past grievances. Communities survive by recognizing each member's value beyond immediate circumstances, she replied, wrapping the prepared poultices in clean cloth. Something I've learned through unexpected teachers. Peterson's expression revealed genuine curiosity beneath lingering embarrassment. Hayes has changed since his tragedy. Those who encountered him in town previously found only bitter isolation. Your family seems to have transformed him as thoroughly as mountain life has transformed you. This external perspective on their mutual influence struck Sarah with its accuracy. She and Nathaniel had indeed healed each other in ways neither could have accomplished alone, her presence reconnecting him to human community he had rejected after his loss, his knowledge enabling her self-sufficiency where dependence had previously been her only option. A transformation rarely occurs through comfort, she observed, gathering her supplies to visit the next patient. Sometimes we need the mountain's harsh lessons to discover our true capabilities. As the outbreak gradually subsided and normal settlement activities resumed, Sarah found herself approached by various community members, offering belated welcome and support. Practical assistance now flowed freely. Offers of preserved foods, children's clothing, tools that might prove useful for a family establishing new life. These gestures, though appreciated, arrived too late to change Sarah's fundamental decision. The Valley settlement, with its rigid social hierarchy and conditional acceptance, no longer represented viable home for her family despite its convenient proximity to established civilization. "When will you return to your cabin?" Mrs. Thompson asked during a community meal organized partly to thank Sarah for her intervention. "The Henderson place remains available since they departed for Denver. The committee would gladly help establish you there now that spring approaches." Sarah's response came without hesitation, her certainty grounded in experiences beyond the Valley's limited understanding. "My family has established home elsewhere. We appreciate the offer, but our path lies in a different direction." "With Hayes?" someone asked, curiosity overcoming propriety. Rather than defensive justification or unnecessary elaboration, Sarah answered with the simple truth that required no external validation, with someone who recognized our value when others saw only burden, in a place where we've learned to thrive rather than merely survive. This quiet certainty silenced further questions more effectively than any emotional defense might have. The community, having witnessed Sarah's transformation from struggling widow to capable healer, could no longer claim authority to judge her decisions. When the time came for her departure, the Valley settlement gathered to express genuine gratitude for her intervention during their crisis. Children she had nursed through fever presented wildflowers gathered from surrounding meadows. Women offered carefully prepared travel provisions. Men who had once dismissed her capabilities now extended respectful farewells. Peterson himself provided escort for her return journey, along with 2 additional men carrying substantial supplies intended as community thanks for her assistance. The gesture, though partly motivated by guilty conscience, represented sincere recognition of debt that transcended material compensation. As they approached the familiar ridge overlooking Nathaniel's cabin, Sarah experienced homecoming anticipation, unlike anything she had felt returning to their Valley residence after Daniel's death. The small structure, nestled against protective rock face, had become more than emergency shelter. It represented chosen belonging rather than mere circumstance. The scene that greeted their arrival captured everything Sarah had come to value about their mountain life. Benjamin and Nathaniel worked together, constructing what appeared to be additional rooms extending from the original cabin, their movements displaying synchronized partnership rather than merely adult instruction and child compliance. Emma supervised little Michael, gathering early spring plants, according to patterns Nathaniel had clearly taught them, their focused attention revealing genuine learning rather than assigned chores. The entire tableau depicted functioning family, rather than temporary arrangement, purposeful, connected, thriving despite challenging circumstances. Peterson observed this scene with obvious reassessment. Hayes has changed indeed, he commented quietly. Never thought to see him building for a future rather than merely surviving his past. We all change when given proper soil to grow, Sarah replied, the mountain's lessons now permanently incorporated into her perspective. Sometimes what appears as abandonment merely clears space for stronger roots elsewhere. As they approached and were spotted by the children, joyful reunion unfolded with Emma and Michael racing toward Sarah while Benjamin completed his current task before joining them. Evidence of both emotional attachment and developing responsibility that balanced immediate desires against necessary completion. Nathaniel maintained characteristic reserve during this initial greeting, allowing family reconnection without insertion into intimate moments. Yet Sarah noted subtle changes in his demeanor, relaxed posture, evident satisfaction in the children's development during her absence, and most tellingly, continued construction that suggested permanent expansion rather than temporary accommodation. Later, as Valleymen departed with promises of continued support should it be needed, Sarah and Nathaniel finally had opportunity for private conversation while the children excitedly showed her their accomplishments from the separation period. "You're building additional rooms," she observed, the question implicit in her statement. Nathaniel nodded, his practical nature addressing function before symbolism. Benjamin needs his own space as he grows. Emma and Michael should have separate sleeping area from adults. The original cabin was designed for solitary existence, not family life. The matter-of-fact explanation contained profound significance beneath its practical surface. Nathaniel had begun adapting his carefully constructed isolation to accommodate permanent family presence without prompting or prior discussion. "You anticipated our return," Sarah said, recognition dawning that his confidence in their reunification had manifested in physical preparation, while hers had remained emotional certainty. "The mountain taught me to read signs others might miss," he replied with characteristic understatement. "Your departure never suggested abandonment, merely necessary journey before returning home." The simple acknowledgement of shared understanding that this remote cabin represented home more truly than any previous dwelling crystallized everything their extraordinary winter had created between them. The valley offered settlement in the Henderson cabin, Sarah informed him, wanting complete transparency about available options, with community support and proper integration into established civilization. Nathaniel continued arranging tools from the day's construction work, his movements deliberate rather than anxious, a reasonable option for a widow with young children. Conventional wisdom would consider it safer than mountain isolation. "Conventional wisdom nearly killed us during the blizzard," Sarah countered, her perspective permanently altered by their shared experiences. Sometimes the path that appears most dangerous offers true security, while safely traveled roads conceal hidden threats. Nathaniel paused in his task, finally meeting her gaze directly. "What future do you envision, Sarah? Collins? Not merely survival until some better opportunity appears, but purposeful building beyond immediate necessity?" The question cut through circumstantial considerations to fundamental values, exactly the clarity Sarah had come to appreciate in Nathaniel's approach to life's challenges. "I envision a home where children learn both practical skills and deeper wisdom about living in harmony with their environment," she answered without hesitation. "A place where knowledge flows freely between generations and across traditional boundaries, where value comes from contribution rather than convention." As she articulated this vision, born from their winter's extraordinary journey from desperate survival to purposeful thriving, Sarah recognized its alignment with aspirations Nathaniel had expressed during their evening conversations. Not escape from painful past through isolation, but creation of meaningful future through deliberate community, however unconventional its composition might appear to outside observers. The mountain offers foundation for such building, Nathaniel acknowledged, his typically reserved expression warming with possibility, though the path would challenge conventional expectations at every turn. Sarah's response came with the calm certainty that had replaced her earlier desperation, transformation created through crisis, but sustained through deliberate choice. "We've already traveled beyond conventional expectations," she observed, gesturing toward the children who had adapted so thoroughly to mountain life that valley settlement would now feel foreign rather than familiar. "The only remaining question is whether we continue that journey together or separately." Nathaniel's answer came not through immediate words, but through purposeful action, retrieving a carefully folded document from his desk drawer and placing it before her. Sarah recognized a property deed, formally registered despite his previous dismissal of such paper claims. "I filed official claim to this land and surrounding acreage during our Mason's Fork journey," he explained. "Not for my sake. Paper boundaries mean little to someone seeking solitude, but to provide legal protection for a family establishing permanent home. Your family, should you choose this mountain as your dwelling place." The deed, Sarah discovered, upon examination, listed both their names as equal property holders, unprecedented legal acknowledgement of a woman's independent ownership rights that reflected Nathaniel's fundamental respect for partnership rather than patriarchal authority. This concrete manifestation of commitment to place, to possibility, and to partnership that transcended conventional arrangements provided foundation for whatever relationship might develop between them. Not desperate clinging amid crisis, but deliberate building toward shared purpose. "We accept," Sarah stated simply, the plural encompassing both her individual decision and her confidence in her children's alignment with this chosen path. Not from necessity any longer, but from recognition that the home we need exists here rather than elsewhere. As spring gradually transformed their mountain, the expanding cabin became physical manifestation of their evolving family structure. Benjamin's increasingly capable assistance with construction reflected Nathaniel's mentorship, transitioning toward partnership as the boy approached manhood. Emma's naturally nurturing tendencies found expression in cultivating garden spaces that combined practical food production with beauty that nourished spirit as well as body. Even little Michael contributed proportionally to his capacity, his natural curiosity about natural systems encouraged rather than constrained by adult expectations. The valley settlement maintained respectful distance, offering assistance when genuinely needed, but respecting boundaries that separated their traditional community from the unconventional family structure developing on the mountain. Children occasionally traveled between these worlds, bringing valuable knowledge in both directions while building bridges between different approaches to frontier challenges. Mason's Fork provided alternative connection to wider civilization, its pragmatic trading foundation allowing economic integration without imposing social conformity. Sarah's adapted crafts, combining Eastern techniques with mountain materials, found ready market among traders appreciating fresh approaches to practical needs. Most importantly, the partnership between Sarah and Nathaniel continued evolving beyond initial rescue dependency toward balanced contribution reflecting each person's developing strengths. Her organizational skills and community connections complemented his technical knowledge and environmental wisdom, creating household that functioned more effectively than either could have established alone. The mountain remains unforgiving, Nathaniel observed one evening as they watched sunset paint distant peaks in spectacular color. But facing its challenges together provides opportunities impossible for isolated individuals. Sarah nodded, understanding flowing between them without elaborate explanation. What nearly destroyed us separately has created something stronger through our combined response. Perhaps that's the mountain's greatest lesson, that true strength emerges through connection rather than isolation, through mutual support rather than mere self-reliance. Their unlikely family, forged through winter's desperate circumstances but sustained through deliberate choice, stood as living testimony that new paths could emerge when conventional routes failed. The widow and her children, once abandoned by traditional community as burdensome, had discovered unexpected sanctuary through a lone cowboy's compassion. Together, they had created home defined not by social convention, but by genuine respect, practical knowledge, and mutual contribution towards shared purpose that transcended mere survival. The mountain, harsh teacher but generous provider for those willing to learn its ways, had transformed crisis into opportunity, revealing capabilities previously concealed beneath conventional expectations, and creating connections stronger than any predetermined social structure could provide. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.